So every violent act from my father's side, I was the first one to receive the consequences of that. And perhaps that's why I choose a very different path in my life for me, because being so aware of, every single act of violence that my father committed, right away come back to me. So I understood that how it works, it's like a boomerang. You send the boomerang with love, the boomerang will come back with love to your life. But if you send the boomerang, to cut some head, perhaps it will come back and cut yours.
The apple don't fall far from the tree, so don't be deceived by him pushing his keys. Hey, buddy, wanna know why he's on the wrong path, not knowing that his dad is the reason why he's on that.
Welcome to the Ideas for the Open-Minded TeeCast. Here we explore crime and punishment, socially relevant issues, and anecdotes from unique people who are making a positive difference. We seek the open-minded, not like-minded, to connect and learn from one another without politicism. We believe that sharing with and learning from extraordinary people with different perspectives will help us make a positive difference of our own. So, what can I say about this next guest? It's one of the more amazing opportunities that I've ever had. I've been speaking with this gent for the last maybe year on and off about doing a special project, a documentary, and I've been privileged to be included in the team that's working on doing that. It's a guy that grew up in the most extraordinary circumstances that one can imagine, being the son of someone who is considered one of the greatest criminal tyrants of our time, if not certainly our generation, Pablo Escobar. And the type of thing that he was able to realize and pull from the experiences that he experienced at home, and what he saw and what he felt during the times of his father's life, and the way that he's managed to take that and kind of mesh it into something so positive is just absolutely amazing. I wish we had more people like this that can draw from the worst of all possible experiences and turn it into something new. I talk to gangs a lot, and a lot of the difficulty in trying to make peace with one another is the fact that there is such a personal level of intrusive crimes. It's tough to make up if this cat had killed one of your family members, but when your father is Pablo Escobar and he's killed over 2,000 people, how do you make amends with that? That's precisely what he's done. He's actually befriended William Rodriguez, who is the son of the leader of the Cali cartel, who was the archenemy, obviously, of Pablo Escobar. And those two have been doing amazing things in order to show the grace and understanding of what they went through and the things that we need to do to repair relationships. Forgiveness is a huge key in this person's life. He is nothing like you would expect. He's a gentleman. He's an author in several books. He's going to be doing some fantastic documentaries. He's gone on to be a very successful architect, and I encourage you to go check out his work because it is fabulous work. So he's successful on his own, and notably successful, having started with none of his father's wealth, mind you, because he wasn't able to take any of that with him. And you'll get to hear a little bit more about that in detail. I've had an opportunity to talk to him for so many hours now that so many incredible stories have accrued over time that it's kind of a shame I was only able to spend 30, 40 minutes with him in this interview, but he was gracious enough to do so as a favor to a friend, because he does have a lot of things going on right now in terms of his rights and new projects and everything else. So such a blessing to have him on the show. Pablo Escobar on the show, aka Sebastian Marroquin. And I can't thank him enough. So without further ado, let's welcome Juan Pablo Escobar. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, 'cause we've had a number of conversations already before, and one of these times you're going to demand payment, I know. So I appreciate it.
I admire your story. We had the opportunity to talk about what you did. So I admire your attitude and how you behave with the ones you pursue in some times of your life. So I also, and this is also why I'm doing this, because I admire the way you treated everyone and how you try to do your best. So this is why
thank you. Well, thanks. Well, it goes a long way, and I definitely want to touch on a lot of the things that you are doing that are quite significant in that regard too, to help make a positive social movement out of all this stuff that has happened in your life. So I'll kind of jump right in. I won't go into great detail about where you were born and stuff like that, because I know we're on limited time. So I can explain a lot of that ahead of time. So really, I guess some of the things that I know people will be particularly interested in knowing is, what was it like in a day in the life? Because everyone has this perception of your father as being some kind of tyrant, and other people have entirely different perception too, that he was so kind and he helped the poor and everything else. So what was it really like living in a household with Pablo Escobar?
Well, in my memories, I remember like a normal family, and it's difficult to define normal. What's the meaning of normal? And for me, I was just the son of a father who was taking care of me and giving me so much love, and he was giving me the best advices you could ever imagine. Sadly, my father wasn't, in a way, giving me the right examples outside of my home, but I was, suddenly enjoying a lot of luxury because, of course, my father was very wealthy, and at the same time suffering a lot of violence in the same moment, because perhaps you could, receive as a gift for your birthday present a motorcycle, but at the same time they have, hey, we need to take it away because the enemies are after you, so you need to run away now. So it's like, hey, I was about to enjoy something, but you take me out. What you gave me is like, it's not very difficult to adapt. In every single minute, your life could change with a simple phone call, or something could happen. So for me, it was a life that nothing was for granted, and you feel all the time in danger, 24 hours in danger. So it's difficult to enjoy your own family, the love you receive from them, and the wealth you could enjoy or have. So there's no point on that. It's for me, it was when I look back, I realized that I couldn't enjoy anything that I had, and in my father's case was even worse, because he owned all of that, but he couldn't enjoy what he had, because he could be named as one of the richest men on earth, but he was living at the same time as the poorest. So it's a lot of contradictions you can find in a single day in my father's life and in my family's life. A lot of contradictions.
And that is interesting that, your normal is a different normal, but it's still normal. So at what age do you think that, I remember you discussing at one point that he sat you down and talked about drugs. And at one point he sat you down and discussed in general kind of what he did. At what point did you kind of come to of that age to where you started to feel the consequence of being in the situation you're in? Because obviously if you're 6 years old, you kind of don't even notice some of those things. So at what point did he sit you down and have some of those conversations, and how did you take to those?
Well, imagine, Tegan, I was 7 years old when my father called me. We were in Panama City, because we were forced to leave the country because my father committed one of his biggest mistakes, ordering the killing of the Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, in 1984. So we were forced to leave the country, And right away, my father had a conversation with me. He sat me down and told me, "Hey, son, I want you to know that I am a bandit and this is what I do for a living." So since from that very exact moment, my father didn't have any trouble to, watch the news with me, read the newspaper and magazines, and tell me, "Hey, yes, I am responsible for this, or I'm not." And he was like every time and every day telling me let's say the true story behind the news. So I realized, and now that I am a father of an 8-year-old kid, I think that what would be my position in front of my son if I decide to be a drug dealer? Would I tell him what I'm doing or not? And I realized that my father perhaps was, he found a little bit challenging the situation that, he cannot, he couldn't stop, the news coming out from every TV so it was impossible for him to stop me, to know what was going on. So I believe that he chose to tell me to confess what he was doing before the press will inform me. So it was a relationship that was built from that moment of trust. And since that, I have several written letters, handwritten letters from my father, where he's telling me what's going on exactly. Because I always ask him to not to lie to me and be, as rude as possible, because I didn't want it to be living in an unreal world. I wanted to know really what was going on and what was happening. So I asked him many times, "Don't lie to me. Just be straight and tell me what's going on. I don't want to be, naive. I want to know what's going on." So many of the letters contain the real stories behind the news. He was even informing me when he was having some conversations with the government or with his enemies or everything what was going on. So since that moment, he told me what was happening, and this is how I started to trust him in a way.
As a kid, I mean, that's pretty extraordinary how young you were, and yet he kind of had his hand forced. How did you maintain friendships, or how did you go to school, or did you go to school? How did all that work out, knowing that he was, if nothing else, a public figure that even other kids may have heard about? How did you navigate all that?
Well, I had like 15 bodyguards every single day of my life. Many days we went to school, but some others it was impossible because of security reasons, or because my father made a call and said to me, "Don't go to school today." That happened once. I was like in fifth year or something like that. He called me, "You are not allowed to go again to the school because somebody is willing to kidnap you. So until I solve the situation, you have to stay in the Hacienda Nápoles farm." So we stay there, and my mother, she hired some teachers, so I continued studying from the hacienda with the permit of the education authorities. So it was hard for me because I was forced to leave my friends in school, and suddenly I was just surrounded exclusively by my bodyguards, 15 of them, and even more because it was my father's. He had 40, and my mother's and my sister. So we were surrounded by an army, all the time, an army of men, and behind them there was, let's say, all the local authorities, the police, the army, everyone, and also my father's enemies behind us. So they were willing to kill us. So it was a very hard situation, and at the same time, my father was, threatening everyone. So every violent act from my father's side, I was the first one to receive the consequences of that. And perhaps that's why I choose a very different path in my life for me, because being so aware of, every single act of violence that my father committed, right away come back to me. So I understood that how it works. It's like a boomerang. You send the boomerang with love, the boomerang will come back with love to your life. But if you send the boomerang, to cut some head, perhaps it will come back and cut yours.
So would it be safe to say that maybe some of your best friends were part of your security team?
Yes, and sadly, and for in another way that brings a lot of hope. And why I'm saying this, because not because I was surrounded by a bunch of very bad guys, I choose to be another one. I choose a different life, and this allowed me to see what happens when you raise a kid, and you raise a kid with love, or you raise a kid, with violence. This is how a bandido or a sicario can grow up, because if you treat a kid, if you hit him, my bodyguards, family stories, they were all related with intern violence, between their family members. So they were witness of how their fathers abused their mothers or even their sisters or themselves. So they saw a lot of violence, and suddenly a guy like my father approached to them, gave them a lot of money and a gun and a lot of power at the same time. And he treated them like sons. That's why my father, was a big leader in those gangs, because he was treating them with a lot of respect and love. So they felt like they were more near a father, the father they never had, than El Patron, So that's a different relationship. That's why many of them were willing to not only to kill for him, but also to die for him.
That being said, then how would you perceive, you say a lot of these guys experienced family violence and violence in and around their families all the time. You experienced the consequence of violence by reaping the consequence of whatever your father did outside the family home. But in the home, now that you have a family of your own to compare it to, how did it compare, aside from any profession that he may have partaken in? How did it feel just to be at home? What kind of relationship did you have? How did you interact with your mother and father? Was it as normal as the one you have now, other than the obvious elephant in the room?
Yes, I think that even a lot of people were surprised of how kind was my father with me and the rest of the family, because of the power he had. A lot of people was with a lot of prejudice about my father, and they were thinking that he was a monster. And I can understand that he was called a monster because he did a lot of harm and killed a lot of people. And I'm not trying to wash that. I'm just trying to describe a situation, because a lot of people were very surprised that my father was willing to stop any important meeting just to see me, just for that possibility. Everything can wait because my son is here, so I need to stay with him. So he stopped the business. Perhaps he was doing multi-billion business at the same time, but he stopped everything just to see me and to play with me. And so he was he was a family guy. He was a man who really enjoyed to stay with me, with my little sister. And, we have even recordings about my father singing songs for my little sister. So it's something that you can never expect, but it really happened. So he was like a normal father, but at the same time, he was running perhaps one of the biggest criminal organizations of the past century, for sure.
And so obviously it lend itself to a tragic ending. And there are a lot of speculation out there. There's a lot of speculation about how that actually happened. And I know you've spoken on this before as well. Do you have, first of all, do you have a theory or any specific knowledge about how he was killed, and perhaps if there's any kind of meaning behind that? Because there's a lot of kind of mysterious things and a lot of rumors and stuff. And then how did you react to that? Because I know there was some significance in how you responded to that when it happened, of course.
Of course, yes. Well, I remember that day very, very well because that day changed my life for sure. And I remember that I threatened the whole country when I realized that my father was dead. And I reacted very, very violently. And I swear that I was going to avenge my father's death. But 10 minutes after, I realized that there was no point to do that. And I called the media again and asked for the forgiveness and asked them to understand my situation and that I was desperate at the moment when I said that. And I apologized and then I made a promise to be a man of peace for the rest of my life. And that's what I've been doing. And I believe that when we talk about how my father passed away, uh, because I don't think the right question is how was your father killed? Because, in the question we are now confirming that somebody killed him. And that's not true, sadly, or I don't know. The real thing behind is that my father chose that day to die. And why I'm saying this is because for the past 10 years of his life, he never used a single telephone, never, because he was totally aware that it was exactly the way he was going to die or someone else. And he explained me during those 10 years, son, please don't ever use a telephone. If you move to any place, don't install the telephone. Please do that. And I was asking, why? And he told me, because everyone I killed, everyone I found, I catch them because they use the phone, because they call their mothers, because they call them the girlfriend or the boyfriend or the relatives. So if you use the phone, you are dead. If you touch the phone, you are dead. So for 10 years, he was teaching me this. And we can all agree that my father was a very intelligent man. So suddenly he forgot what he was teaching for the 10 past years of his life to his son, that he could never use the phone because he was probably going to be, catched by the authorities or killed by his enemies. So he forgot December 2nd, 1993, that lesson. No, he chose to die that day and he called us to say goodbye. And you can hear the recordings, they are public, and you can hear him and me telling him, don't call anymore. We are fine. Please don't call anymore. And I was hanging up the phone right away because I wanted to protect him. I was so confused.
You knew what that
and
meant.
my father, he taught me for the past 10 years that I couldn't use a phone. And here I am, let's say not detained, but almost detained in a hotel that belonged to the military forces in Colombia. And he's the most wanted man in the world is calling me to say, hello, come on, don't do that. You can send someone else to do that. He had many people to ask them, hey, go to any public phone, make a call, just see if my family are okay or not. They are okay. But he will make the call. And he made it because he wanted to be found. And the real, you have several versions of how my father passed away. If you ask the U.S. authorities, they will say to you, they were the ones who killed him. If you ask the Colombian police, they will say, we were the one who made the operation and we killed him. And if you ask the paramilitary groups, they were going to say, yes, we were the ones who killed, and we made that favor to the Colombian police. And that's the truth, The truth is that Mr. Carlos Castaño, the head of the right wing, the paramilitary groups in Colombia, he was at the beginning, he was an associate of my father, a friend of my father, and then they became enemies. And Mr. Castaño himself told my mother that he was in charge of the operation when my father committed suicide. And why I'm saying that my father committed suicide, because for many years of my life, I heard my father saying that he had 15 bullets in his 6-hour pistol and that he was going to save the last bullet for him. He always told me, I have 15 bullets in my gun. 14 will be for my enemies and the last one will be for me. They will never catch me alive. And this is a thing that if you check my father's story, for the last years, you can find a lot of ideas of suicide in many, many of parts of his life. And do you remember the extradition? There was a group called the Extraditables. It was the guys, the drug dealers who were afraid of being extradited to the United States. So they built a group with my father to fight against the government, against extradition, to change the law, the constitution. And the slogan of the group was, we prefer, to rest in peace in Colombia than to be in a jail in the United States. So my father was willing to commit suicide in many occasions in his life. And we also have a recording when he said they will never catch me alive. And so every time I talk about this, it's like a lot of people doesn't trust about who's saying the truth. And I have like 4 books when you can see and read 3 different versions of how my father passed away. One of them is from the Colonel Aguilar, who claims to be the one. Let's say a couple of things about this guy. He was convicted for the Supreme Court in Colombia to be related with the paramilitaries, money laundering, and etc. So I don't trust this guy's word. And also, he said that he killed my father using an R-15 rifle. If you shoot somebody with an R-15 rifle, you blow up their head. There's no more head. So he didn't even sat for 5 minutes to say a good lie, to
right.
think about it well before saying the lie. Yeah, exactly. Come on, and let's go to the morgue, and you will see a guy shot by a 9mm and a guy shot with a R-15 rifle. You will see the difference. You don't need to study to see what it is and what happened to a body. So, and there's another General Naranjo, who published another book, and I'm talking about my book, the Colonel's book, and the General's book, all with the same publishing house. That's funny. The same publishing house has 3 different stories of how my father died. And the General says to the Colonel, you didn't do it. You weren't there. So not even between policemen, can had a specific idea of how my father passed away. So this tells us a little bit of how confusing it is. And just for the last part of the answer will be, I really don't care how my father passed away. I don't care if he was hit by a truck or a piano fell, or if he killed himself, or if a U.S. sniper killed him from, 10,000 kilometers away. That's, the fact is that my father passed away. And the sad part is that nothing changed. The drug trafficking business kept going on as usual, and nothing happened. Nothing really changed. So this is how my father was considered. Somebody says that that he was killed by the police. I should say that he chose that day to die. Who pulled the trigger? I believe it was my dad, because he told me and he taught me that if I wanted to kill myself, because I could find myself surrounded by my father's enemy easily. So he told me it's better that you kill yourself than you allow them to catch you alive, because they're gonna cut you in pieces, and they were willing to do that.
Wow!
So he taught me how to commit suicide. He told me, don't put your gun in your mouth or ear, because the bullet can take any other direction, and perhaps it won't hurt you badly. And he told me, I speak with the doctors, and I wanted to know exactly the point where I should put the bullet so I could die right away. And they told me the right ear. Well, I can send you a video where you can see where my father had the gunshot, the right ear.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of moot, I guess, at this point too. There's a lot of people, attention grabbing, of course, through that situation too, and knowing how much you strive to make the world better based on how you grew up is really impressive. I mean, you're a successful architect, and you have started reaching out to members of families who were affected by your father's violence, right? Can you?
Yes, many of them.
So, how did you? I think there's some significance behind your initial attempt to reach out to the Cali cartel. What was your intention behind that, and how did that go?
Well, it was very hard for me when I realized that my father wasn't there anymore. And everybody wanted me dead because, of course, I reacted very violently, and the cartels were worried because I promised vengeance and something like that. So they called me, and they forced my family, my mother, and everyone to stay in a negotiation where we were, you know, forced to give everything we inherited from my father, everything. And I mean, you know, the only thing they didn't take out, it was, the clothes we have, because we gave everything: helicopters, motorcycles, apartments, lots, and properties, and work of art, everything we have. And they told us, if you hide one coin, we kill you. And they knew everything because they were partners of my father's in the past. So they knew everything, even more than the authorities. So um, finally, in my second book, I thank my father's enemies for allowing me to have that meeting with them, because they just they let me stay with my life, and it was a big decision for them. And this it was a big decision because they were, if they kill me, they were taking any chances, so they will be sure that nobody will avenge my fathers. But they wanted to give hope to their sons too. And they said, once something like this happened to our sons, we wanted to be we want people to respect them, and so that this is why we are respecting your life, and you have to promise that you will never be involved in the drug trafficking business. They told me that in a meeting in Cali, in the city of Cali in Colombia, and they told me, we are going to let you leave, but we are going to condemn you to be poor, because if we leave you with $1 million or any kind of money, you will kill everyone. So this is why I thank them, because they truly gave me the opportunity to start over from scratch, having nothing in my life. Because if they truly allowed me to stay with something that I inherited from my father, for sure that I could, committed a lot of mistakes. But being without anything, that really gave us, a fresh start for us in our lives. So this is why and how I ended up contacting Mr. William Rodriguez Abadia, who's the son of Miguel Rodriguez, the head of the Cali cartel. And I don't know how, but very, very fast we became very close friends. And we should be the worst enemies, because we should hate each other in the worst possible ways you could ever imagine, because this is how we were raised. We were raised to hate and to damage the enemy and have no compassion for anyone. So, but we choose a different life. We choose to continue with our past, not dishonoring our fathers, but we don't have to honor our fathers. Continuing with the path of violence they already, they already walked through. So for me, and having William today as a close friend, it's a miracle for sure. That's something that shows that reconciliation and forgiveness could be achieved without any excuses, no matter how much violence we suffer between human beings and families and countries and authorities. This could be solved through forgiveness, and forgiveness is not about forgetting things. It's not that. Forgiving is about healing. It's about letting the pain go out, because if you don't forgive, the pain stays with you, and it makes you sick, and it brings hate and vengeance and very bad feelings and negative feelings to your life. So you cannot move on. And this is how we started a process even before Williams, with my father's victims, because I wrote a letter and I asked publicly their forgiveness, because I wasn't happy, because of my father's actions against them. I was truly aware that this needed to be solved in a way, and I knew, of course, that I wasn't responsible for the criminal actions of my father, but I took moral responsibility for that, because I wanted to put an end.
Do you think that they also held some kind of animosity for you even though you weren't directly responsible? Do you feel like they kind of harbored some of that resentment towards you for those killings before you reached out?
Well, I was totally surprised, because I was expecting exactly that, exactly that. But every single victim that I have in contact with, they told me that I'm not responsible, and they know that. But they are truly grateful for the things that I said, and they told me that how should I say this? They are totally happy to see that even if I'm not responsible for the criminal actions of my father, I am taking that responsibility, and I am allowing them to know the truth behind the violence they suffer, and I am giving a message of hope and awareness to the youngest, so they will never repeat my father's story. That's the most important thing we should do, and it's not only about asking for forgiveness, but making people aware that this is not another Netflix show that is so successful and is such a good life. Because if you see my father's life and how he's being portrayed in Netflix, you will see that a lot of people will say, "Hey, I want to be like my Pablo Escobar because if that's the kind of life I'm gonna live, it's a good life." But that's not the reality we live. My father didn't have the opportunity to hide and to run away while he was, staying in 7-star mansions. That never happened. He was having a lot of money, but living as the poorest man on earth. So that's a big contradiction. I feel richer today. I have perhaps, 0.0001% of the wealth that my father earned. Yes, but I feel richer than him because I have freedom. Because I can walk and I can cross the street and buy a piece of bread and that's it. Perhaps I cannot buy caviar, but who cares, man? I'm free, and that's not all the money in the world can pay for your freedom. My father had all the money in the world, and he never had a single moment of freedom.
He was constantly looking over his shoulder, right?
Yeah. So that's not life, man. That's not a life.
Well, I know you're doing great things, and I know we're running short on time. So, is there anything? Obviously, you've made a success of yourself. You've displayed your compassion in very extraordinary ways. I admire you very much for having the strength to go out and reach out to the world that you knew could potentially be your demise, but you did so anyway for the good of everyone. And congratulations on all that and your success as a father as well. Is there anything else going on with your life that you plan to do in order to keep furthering your cause? You have anything you want to talk about? Projects or anything?
Well, thank you, Tegan, for your time too, and I continue. When you are committed to peace, you have to be committed for the rest of your life. Every single day you have to wake up and have a positive attitude and be willing to talk about this and about many other things. But the most important thing for me is continue with the reconciliation process. For me, it's something that I will never stop until my last breath, because I truly believe that when we gave ourselves the possibility and the opportunity to talk, even about the worst and the most painful subjects, we can heal and we can move forward in life. And this is what I experienced so far, having at least the conversation with 150 families, all of them direct victims of my father's violence. And I can tell you with a lot of happiness that I don't have even a single anecdote to share with you of a reconciliation process that, didn't go well. And thank God, every single occasion that I had, and I'm talking about reconciliation process with politicians, paramilitaries, guerrillas, lefty, right wings, and even, recently, and we became very close friends with Aaron Seal, the son of Barry Seal, a former CIA agent and DEA informant who was killed by my father's orders in the year 1986 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So there's a lot of different, families, nationalities, people, cultures, uh, men with a lot of power, and with a lot of power. And my father killed their sons, but they are willing to make peace no matter what, So it's very nice and very, it brings a lot of hope to continuing doing what I'm doing, because when you truly know that a lot of people is being affected positively because of this intention behind, well, that's something that we should continue doing for the, I want to speak until the last victim appears, and I don't know when that's going to happen. So I'm doing this because I think it's the right thing to do, and because I have a son, and I don't want to leave him a lot of hate behind. I want to build as much peace as we can as a human being for him, for the future of all of the humankind. That's for me the most important.
Well, it's a powerful story, and you've made a 180 in terms of the direction that everything was going. So I'm proud to know you. I'm honored to have sat down and shared some stories with you. I really appreciate your time.
Me too, Tegan. And I know you have a very interesting story too. And I admire you for what you did in the past and what you are doing today. And I believe in the power of souls and how they can find each other to connect. And this is you and me talking today. Thanks to your good decisions in life, and thanks to mine too.